Thank you all for being here. I listened to all of you with great interest. Professor, do you believe that people respond to incentives?
Welcome back to the Constitution Corner, where America's roots guide its future. If you're sick of government bureaucrats hiding behind red tape, ducking responsibility, and burying the truth from the American people, then slam that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because today we are talking about something that cuts right to the heart of what's broken in Washington: the absolute lack of accountability when it comes to transparency.
Thank you, Senator. I do believe that people respond to incentives.
Do you believe that what you allow is what will continue?
I suppose I do.
Okay. I listened to all of you talk about enhancing affirmative disclosure requirements, strengthening the presumption of disclosure. I listened to you talk about consultants. I listened to you talking about the need for a public interest balancing test. But those can be ignored just as easily as every other part of the statute. Why don't you just create personal liability for the person responsible for turning over the documents?
Certainly,
Right.
Senator. There are systems, other jurisdictions around the world that do have, in fact, personal penalties for government officials.
Do you recommend it for us?
I don't think that we're at the point where we necessarily have to take such a step in order to drastically change the incentives that agencies.
Why not? I mean, all administrations stall and restall in turning over documents to the American people, don't they? Does anybody disagree with that? It's not a Democrat thing or a Republican thing. It's an executive branch thing, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I do not disagree with that. It is.
So why don't we hold the people responsible, personally responsible? I'm not saying not afford them due process. You may want to require bad faith with a reasonable, not an impossible definition of bad faith. I mean, if you want to solve this problem, why don't you just create personal liability, Mr. Howell?
I think that's a terrific idea. Right now, the mechanism to have liability is basically an attorney's fees, and those are rarely given out. So the government really is never forced to pony up.
Well, the employees don't care if the government gets hit with attorney's fees, do they?
Correct. And that's why the Department of Justice is willing to tolerate us suing them 100 times, because we all pay for their lawyers.
Look, we can write and rewrite statutes all we want to. But it is clear that people in the government are not responding to Freedom of Information Act requests in bad faith. Sometimes they need more time, but I'm talking about in bad faith. That's clear. And it happens on both sides. So instead of just rewriting new laws and new rules that they're going to ignore, why don't you just hold people personally responsible? What about it, Doctor?
I actually fully agree, and I would point out that there's a mechanism in the FOIA statute currently where if it turns out that there's evidence of an agency or an agency employee intentionally withholding documents without a reasonable basis, a judge could, in issuing that order, make that finding.
And when's the last time that happened?
Almost never.
Yeah, it hasn't happened in the history of ever, has it?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And until Congress makes it very clear that we're serious about this, we're going to be equal opportunity pit bulls here and say, regardless of who is running the executive branch, you have an affirmative obligation to turn over documents. And if you don't do it, you're going to be personally liable. That's going to work, isn't it?
Well, I would hope so. Of course, as you know, as a former law professor, there are issues with, the executive branch claiming immunity for these employees. I'm not saying
deny them due process.
Right.
I'm not saying an ordinary negligence standard. I'm saying that if some person is being an obstructionist and you can prove it, they ought to be held personally liable. We wouldn't have to do it for long.
Senator Whitehouse.
I still had 9 seconds left.
Proceed.
No, I yield my back.
Sir.
But I do want to say Professor Whitehouse has some interesting thoughts about enforcing orders that he and I have talked about. So I'm going to listen to him carefully here.
Senator Whitehouse. Senator Kennedy has predicted my line of questioning.
Now, in a recent hearing that didn't get nearly enough attention, we heard one of the most important truths spoken on the Senate floor in years. And it came in the form of a simple question. Why don't we just hold government officials personally responsible when they refuse to turn over documents to the American people? That's right. Enough with tweaking FOIA rules. Enough with begging agencies to do the right thing. Enough with writing new statutes only to watch unelected bureaucrats ignore them. Senator Kennedy and others asked the question we've all been wondering. Why aren't we making these people face personal consequences for stonewalling transparency? Because let's be honest, folks, this is not a partisan issue. This is not a Democrat problem or a Republican problem. It's an executive branch problem. The default behavior across all administrations has been to delay, deny, redact, and obfuscate. And it doesn't matter who's in power. It's a culture of impunity that has infected Washington. So what's the solution? Simple. Personal liability. That's right. If you are the person responsible for turning over FOIA documents, and you intentionally withhold them in bad faith, you should be held accountable. Personally. Legally. We're not talking about bureaucratic wrist slaps or toothless internal reviews. We're talking real consequences for real obstruction. One of the panelists even admitted it. Right now, the worst that can happen is the government pays a few $1,000s in attorney's fees. And who pays that? We do. The taxpayers. The very people being denied access to public information. Meanwhile, the DOJ is happy to let you sue them 100 times because they've got your wallet to fund their defense. What incentive do they have to comply? None. That's why this is such a powerful idea. Senator Kennedy laid it out perfectly. If someone in the government willfully hides documents, delays disclosure, or obstructs access to public records, make them pay. Not the agency. Not the taxpayers. The person responsible. And let them have due process. Let them have their day in court. But make no mistake, when wrongdoing is proven, there must be consequences. Because what you allow is what will continue. Let me repeat that, what you allow is what will continue. You can write all the new laws you want. You can give speeches about sunshine and transparency. But unless there are teeth in the law, unless there is accountability, nothing will change. And that's exactly what the American people are sick and tired of. We want answers. We want to know what our government is doing with our money, with our institutions, and with our trust. And when we file a FOIA request, we deserve the truth, not a 6-month delay, a 90% redaction, or a bogus excuse about workload. This is especially important in an age where so much is hidden under the guise of national security or administrative burden. We've watched as scandal after scandal is buried until it's politically convenient to release, or never released at all. We have to change the incentives. If bureaucrats knew that stonewalling the public would cost them personally, they'd think twice. You wouldn't need to enforce it 100 times. You'd only need to enforce it once or twice before the whole system straightened up. This is common sense. This is fairness. And this is the kind of reform that every American, regardless of party, should support. So what can you do? Share this video. Call your representative. Tell them we need personal liability for bad faith FOIA violations. Not symbolic rules. Not window dressing. Real, enforceable, personal accountability. And don't forget to comment below. Have you ever filed a FOIA request? Did you get the runaround? We want to hear your story. Subscribe to the Constitution Corner for real talk, bold ideas, and unapologetic defense of the American people's right to know. We are the Constitution Corner, where Americans' root guides its future. Until next time, stand strong, speak truth, and may God bless the United States of America.